Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into some of the most intense, bizarre, and frankly apocalyptic imagery ever recorded. We're looking at the Book of Revelation. Specifically, we're zooming in on chapter 14, verses 17 through 20. This is the passage detailing the downright terrifying winepress of the wrath of God. But look, we aren't just going to read this text on our own and guess what it means. We're actually using the brilliant minds of the early church fathers, scholars like Bede, Ocumius, and Andrew of Caesarea, as our personal guides to decode these ancient, mysterious symbols. To decode these dense symbols piece by piece, we need a roadmap. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at a tale of two harvests. Then we'll meet the angelic executioners, examine the treading of the great winepress, decode some seriously weird apocalyptic math, and finally uncover the ultimate purpose behind all this wrath. Okay, we have to start with this incredibly shocking image from the text. Just picture the scale of devastation for a second. It really forces us to ask, what on earth does a river of blood, horses, and ancient measurements actually mean to early Christian thinkers? Because, they didn't just read this as a horror story. To them, every single word was a deliberate code just waiting to be cracked. So, kicking things off with section 1, a tale of two harvests, wheat versus grapes. This contrast really builds the foundation for the entire cosmic gathering. The duality here is just striking. Just prior to the verses we're focusing on, there's a figure on a white cloud. Commentators like Caesarius of Arles often identify this figure as Christ the Reaper, gently gathering the good seed, the wheat, into his church. But the vintager? Yeah, this is no gentle harvest. This is the realm of executioners, stepping in to aggressively cut off the wicked, who are symbolized here as clusters of grapes. Now, you might be wondering, why grapes? And why now? Well, the key concept here is ripeness. As the commentator Bede points out, just as goodness can reach a state of perfection, wickedness can actually reach its absolute limit. These grapes are the impious transgressors who have literally maxed out their capacity for sin. The harvest only triggers when their evil is fully 100% complete. Which brings us right into section 2, the angelic executioners, administrators of justice. Let's look a little closer at the actors carrying out this pretty grim task.
So these aren't exactly the harp-playing cherubs you see in Renaissance paintings. Oecumenia sees them as direct agents of punishment, bringing about the end of the world. Andrew of Caesarea adds this terrifying environmental layer, arguing they actually control natural forces like fire and water. And Bede? He takes a fascinating spiritual angle. He suggests these angels represent the daily fervent prayers of the church, finally being answered with justice.
And they don't just appear out of nowhere either. The text specifically notes that they emerge from the heavenly temple and the altar. This is a super crucial detail for the commentators. Coming directly from the temple means they have divine authorization. They aren't just rogue spirits causing chaos. They are caretakers of creation acting in God's direct administration, stepping in to clean up a vineyard that has fallen into absolute ruin. And that sets the stage perfectly for where this happens and why it has to happen outside. So what actually happens to these ripe, wicked grapes? Let's jump into section 3, treading the great winepress, the location of wrath. Once the grapes are gathered up, they're thrown into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Andrew of Caesarea describes this winepress as wide and spacious. Why? Simply because of the sheer, overwhelming multitude of those being punished. He connects it to the biblical idea that the way of destruction is wide. But honestly, perhaps the most important detail about this winepress isn't its size, it's its location. The text explicitly states this whole event happens outside the city. Ancient theology was totally obsessed with purity and separation. Oecumenius makes the case that it would be completely unseemly for this punishment to happen within the heavenly Jerusalem. Why? Because the ultimate bliss of the saints shouldn't be spoiled by having a front row seat to the agonizing fate of the wicked. It's literally about permanently separating the bad away from the good. And this brings us back to that staggering image of blood rising to a horse's bridle. Early scholars split wildly on what these horses actually are. Oecumenius suggests it's a metaphor of divine warfare, where God rides these angelic enforcers like horses, and it's the angels' bridles soaking in the blood of the sinners they punish.
On the other hand, Andrew of Caesarea views the horses as the sinners themselves. He argues that people who lived like lustful, unbridled horses in life are now being overtaken by tortures exactly equal to their unrestrained passions. The punishment perfectly mirrors the crime, right?
Okay, moving on to my absolute favorite part, Section 4, decoding bizarre apocalyptic math, specifically the 1600 stadia. Let's put on our cryptographer hats for a minute. The text explicitly states that the river of blood flows for exactly 1,600 stadia. To us today, this just sounds like an arbitrarily huge distance, but to the early church fathers, there were 0 random numbers in Scripture. This exact figure left them scrambling to find the hidden symbolic architecture behind the math. The mental gymnastics here are just incredible. Prometheus, for instance, uses a geometric method. He takes the number 4, which represents the 4 corners of the world, multiplies it by itself, and then by 100. 4 times 100 equals 1600. For him, this mathematically proves the judgment is universal. It touches every single corner of the globe. Then you have Andrew of Caesarea, who uses a chronological method. He breaks it down into 1,000 plus 600. The 1,000, 10 times 100, represents the complete magnitude of human evil. And the 600? That represents humanity's eager engagement in sin through the misuse of the 6 days of creation, and it links directly back to Noah's flood, which happened in Noah's 600th year. So for Andrew, this number mathematically binds the end of the world to the very dawn of creation and the first great global judgment. It's fascinating. And that leads us to our final stop, Section 5, the ultimate purpose of wrath, testing the useless. After all this terrifying imagery of blood, sickles, and cosmic calculations, we have to ask the core question, what is the actual point of it all? The thing is, these commentators didn't just see chaotic, pointless violence here. They saw a highly structured cosmic filtration system. The intense tribulation of the winepress is designed specifically to grind down and destroy everything that is vain, wicked, and useless. It acts as a massive threshing floor, separating the wheat from the chaff. Just like precious metals have to endure intense fire to burn away impurities, this whole apocalyptic event is ultimately about proving and preserving exactly what is righteous and incorruptible. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to chew on. The ancient world didn't rely on extreme apocalyptic horror merely to scare people into submission. Instead, they used these allegories to mathematically, chronologically, and symbolically construct a vision of universal justice and ultimate purity. The wrath had a real purpose. It was the intense, necessary heat required to forge a perfect world. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the symbols behind the stories.